Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Boyles. I'm Executive Director of Mass Humanities, and so happy to have this great turnout today for another in our series of conversations with leaders in the public humanities. You can follow this conversation through Twitter or Facebook at Mass Humanities. You can also be sure to visit masshumanities.org to join our newsletter and continue to hear about more online events that we have. For this series, I've really been interested in talking to people who are leading humanities councils or working in humanities councils around the country. One, because I think that the work the humanities councils do is extremely important and still in many ways under the radar, particularly now. I think the people that run humanities councils are extraordinarily resourceful, but also very busy and not always able to take the opportunity to step away and really reflect on all the great work they're doing. Selfishly, I also like to talk to EDs because I get advice and I get insights. And I think that the things that I hear in private are also many of them things that I want the people who love and support Mass Humanities and the humanities in Massachusetts to hear, specifically about how other people are looking down the road, how they're dealing with the situations that they face day to day, and why they got to do this work in the first place. So many of you joined us last week to talk to Anthony Poore from the New Hampshire Council. In a couple of weeks, we're going to talk to my colleague Stuart Rockoff in Mississippi. But today is actually very special to me because Phoebe Stein is someone that I've admired in the field for quite a long time, and she's now in a new role that is national and that really looks at the entire field. And I think she's the ideal person to be in this role. Prior to being named in May, the successor of our colleague and great friend Esther McIntosh, Phoebe was the executive director of Maryland Humanities, where she had done fantastic work for many years. And prior to that, she had been at the Illinois Humanities Council as director of public affairs. That's a unique perspective and one that I think we'll hear from today because you have two different states. Each state is very different. And now we reach this national look, and I think in all of those positions she's brought just a sharpness and eloquence and a strategic mind to the work that we do that I've learned a lot from, and I think we'll all learn a lot from today. We will take questions, so you can drop those into the chat and I will read them off in the last 15 minutes. We've got about an hour here today, and again, just my pleasure to welcome Phoebe Stein.
Thank you so much, Brian. That's really a super, super kind introduction. I really appreciate it. I'm really honored to be in my position and to be here today.
Well, we're honored to have you and to have a little bit of time together. You know, I ask this of all kinds of people because we talk about the humanities and its audiences, and often we sometimes I think overthink what the young person wants. You know, that audience look to when it comes to the humanities. And when we think of some of our original experiences, it wasn't that we ran, you know, nose to nose with the word humanities. We had a certain gateway into the field. And for me, I can think of, you know, a history class where I was asked to interview someone, and I interviewed my grandmother, and it turned out she had marched on Washington and she had marched in the nuclear freeze protests. I can think of reading Jack Kerouac and thinking about all the rest of the world that I wanted to be a part of. Those are our unique experiences, and for some of us, it triggers a lifelong engagement in this work. So I thought I would start off with something in your life early on that led you maybe into this path. I know you grew up out of Washington, D.C., but is there, you know, a book or an experience that as you look back now and you're now in this position, you think that really kicked things off for me?
Yeah, it is a really good question. It's an interesting one. I would say that, and a few people on this call probably will have heard this, sort of what I consider my origin story for public humanities, which is that I didn't consider myself a child then, but I do now. I was 21, I was in college, and I went to go hear Toni Morrison give the Tanner lectures. I think they were like the Tanner Lectures in Human Values at the University of Michigan. It was on campus, but it was a public event. And I can honestly say I understood probably a third of what she was talking about. But I wanted to be a part of whatever she was talking about. I mean, she's so brilliant. But really what she was talking about was the humanities, part of the humanities are about a moral imperative for equity. And it was a lecture called Unspeakable Things Unspoken, which is certainly the focus of a novel like Beloved, which is my favorite novel. And I had read that novel, and I went on in later years to teach that novel. But to be in a public space and hear her talk about the moral imperative of writing novels, and she also wrote, you know, essays. Obviously, she was reading one of them, but that was kind of the moment. That was the moment. I just thought, whatever this is, I don't really know, but I want to be a part of that. If you're talking about earlier, when I was actually a younger child, I would say, you know, my parents read to me, and I had a love of literature very early on. But we had a family friend who was a visual artist, and she lived with us for a while. You know, this was the 70s, and she read The Phantom Toll Booth to me every night. I don't know if anyone knows that book, but then she drew a very beautiful pencil drawing of all the characters in the book, and that poster hangs in my bedroom. So I think Phantom Toll Booth was my real introduction.
That's a fantastic introduction. You know, we think about these crossroads between the arts and the humanities, and sometimes we keep them in two different places, but I think a lot of those early experiences are engaging with the work of art and trying to reflect, and that sounds like a time when you got even more of a chance to reflect and ended up with another piece of art out of it. You then, you end up getting a Ph.D., you join the Illinois Humanities Council, and we know the council world has changed so much and continues to change as it mirrors the world and the challenges that we face. I know that when I first joined the council, it felt sort of, hearing you talk about the moral imperative, it felt like, wow, this work is actually being done and I can engage in it. I don't know all the many ways that I can do that. What was it like, even in your first year in Illinois, and how you came to that position, and some of the things I think that were sparked in you at that point, because I think that's always very crucial in those first couple of years in a career.
Yeah. Well, I'm delighted to see that the person who hired me for that job is on this call, Christina Velitis, and I started as a summer intern in 1999, writing the Schwartz Prize nomination for our council. So that's a funny kind of connection to the Federation. But I stumbled in.
The Schwartz Prize is
it's a prize given by Humanities Council's peers for excellence in public programming in the humanities within the council community, and it's given at our national conference. And you know, we did win that year, I'm just saying, but so it was a program about math. Anyway, so I stumbled into that position. I was teaching full time in an adjunct capacity, though, at DePaul University in Chicago. And I really just, a couple of people in the communications department left, and I applied for the job. And I'm eternally grateful to Christina Velitis for that opportunity. So, interesting question about how it was different. My perception then, so that's 21 years ago, is that when I arrived there, the idea that the humanities were a lens through which to really engage audiences, civic engagement was really, I think, one of the major trends at that time. And this idea that the humanities was a lens to really engage in social issues, cultural issues, topical issues. And so at that time, the council was doing lots of exciting work. We did science programming, brought in a bunch of physicists, or really, I think, philosophers to talk about art science and the humanities and art, actually. And then we did a huge one-year program looking at Brown versus Board of Education, the 50th anniversary, and desegregation in education and arts, and also the lingering segregation, obviously. And later programs there focused on oil and water and engaging audiences and environmental issues. So I would say that hasn't changed. It's just that to me is kind of what we lead with now in the councils, I feel. I will also say that at that time, the councils were also doing their grant making, but then also creating their own programs as well. So I think at that time, the growth of councils doing their own programming was happening. Also, when I started there, the board role in part was to review grants, and we did that at board meetings over 2 days. And that certainly has now shifted for many councils, excuse me, if not all, to a board role. I will say, of course, most recently, the councils have granted out $30 million of CARES money, and that's nearly 4,000 grants across the nation. So grant making is going strong. It's just done a little bit differently. And then, of course, the tools that we used were different. We had email, but faxing was kind of king. And we had no smartphones. This is just maybe for younger folks. And I had a friend who got a job at a startup, and he was explaining to me he was going to do instant messaging. And I was like, what a stupid idea that is. Why would anyone want messaging in real time? What a dumb idea. And he's obviously going nowhere. So I was young, judgmental, and clearly not a futurist or a very good investor. So
I always think about copy machines and how when I started, it was around 1990. You know, you had to sit there for 2 days doing a board packet and flipping things over.
And my first job, actually, which was at the National Archives, I was kind of the babysitter of the copier. You know how you had someone on staff for jams and other things, which a jam would require, you know, like a couple weeks, it felt like, of work to get it back up.
Well, I think that's really interesting because in some ways what we do with council work and public humanities work, because it is very public facing, there is, there's the grunt work part. You know, there's that kind of lifting that has to be done, that if we were in more, I guess, theory-based programs, we might not be doing as much of. And then there's also that intersectionality you talked about. And I really find that to be, as you said, something we continue to lead with. And it drives a lot of the program development that goes on around the country, is to really break out of the box of what someone might call traditional humanities work, and to understand how that lens can be placed on so many different aspects of American life.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit, you know, a week ago ahead of this, and I had said, you know, one of the things that I admired when you were in Maryland is, like, I remember really good responsive programming being done, especially after the death of Freddie Gray and the protest ensued there. Now that you're getting, you know, you've come in at a time which is quite pivotal, it feels like, for the country. Where are you seeing councils do work that is touching on racial justice? And that could be long-term work that's being done or responsive work right now. And of course, the pandemic is another place where I think it's interesting to hear from you, because you are in touch with so many different people, the way that this this intersectional work is being actually applied to a very, very complex set of problems.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I talked about, and this is not unique to us, but feeling that the country is kind of at a crossroads, and even in maybe the world, when we see the protests across the world in support of racial equity. And I would say that, yeah, I think councils and their programs have a lot to say, and have been having a lot to say in their programming, or that they're, I would say, not so much the councils are saying, but they're convening opportunities for people to engage and talk about and share with each other on issues. I mean, it is racial justice, it is inequities. I can give a few specific examples, but I think there's also, you know, a lot around the distrust of government and each other, and of course the ideological polarity and polarities and divisiveness in the country. And then councils in their programming are also addressing the inequities that are laid bare by COVID, obviously, but also the grief and also the isolation. So, you know, I see councils doing all of that. And since March, your council, as well as all others, have been providing connection and community, you know, virtually. And so they really had to, you know, pivot to, councils that pivoted to the digital, or the, I guess, online or the Zoom. One thing they're seeing is really an explosion in the numbers of people that can come, and from all over different geographical regions. Sometimes councils are reporting hundreds more people, in some cases thousands more people. It's rather astounding. But I would say that I'm inspired by that pivot, and also it's not only just the pivot, but it's the depth of those conversations. So I think that many councils have already been in this space. You talk about some of the grant making that when I was at Maryland Humanities, we did. We set up a humanities fund for Baltimore. I think about the racial equity grant making in Mississippi that has happened. I think about the Black Thought series in New Hampshire Humanities. I'm not sure if Anthony you talked to Anthony last week and yeah. Talked about that. So, and I think, you were reading Frederick Douglass' program. That was certainly going on, but had a certain poignancy, I think, this year particularly. Without understanding, I think, and I think folks on this call understand that, but the histories, the stories, the context, we really can't know what's at stake, right? And so I think that's really part of what the councils provide, and also they can provide a bridge for understanding. I'm not going to claim that it's a kumbaya moment, because it's not. We're not in the business of changing people's minds. I think we're in the business of hearing each other, being able to hear each other with trust and respect. I also think about the Humanities New York. There are conversations on the couch. I went to a fabulous conversation about really memorializing. It was about taking down Confederate monuments in a way, but a lot of different opinions and thoughts that were expressed, and people kind of building on each other's energy, and it just felt very authentic, and not like people were tiptoeing around, but really, just saying, I appreciate this so much, and folks from all over the state. They also did a program, Humanities New York, on pandemic and inequality. And I also visited I think that might have been a New Hampshire program as well. So forgive me, all other councils that I haven't mentioned yet. So
there's a lot of great work being done, so it's easy to not to get everybody in there.
Right.
You made a good point, I think, about the bridging that we do. And for me, I think that's always a big challenge, but it's also in some ways the secret sauce of why the councils stay relevant. We are publicly funded. We are committed, I think, to being that common ground, but that common ground keeps getting smaller in America today. When you talk to executive directors, or even when you think about the work that you have done, can you maybe talk a little bit more about how you maintain that space? Because it's not easy, and it does almost daily you get presented, especially if you're doing public programming, public events, with new to that balance that I think makes us a beautiful thing and increasingly rare.
Yeah, I would say a couple of things in regard to that. I also want to shout out to Virginia Humanities radio program, backstory, or no, it was With Good Reason. They had an entire segment on the racial inequities baked into the national park system and the Appalachian Trail. Just fascinating history. So, search that out as well. I will answer this question by the way of an sort of a little anecdote, which is that on the board at Maryland Humanities when I was there, we had a incredible board member who had been at the Brown v. Board decision. He also had integrated Harvard Law School, and just an amazing man. And because I'm on a live Zoom call, I can't, Walter, and I will remember his name in a minute, sorry. But so Walter Leonard, excuse me. So read his New York Times obituary, it's amazing. So he did pass, but we were doing a programming when I was in Maryland called Practicing Democracy, Finding Our Common Ground. And everyone on the board was talking about this finding common ground part. And it didn't sit well with the board because they thought, are we making everyone agree that we have, we are all fundamentally the same? Where's the, and Walter finally raised his hand, and he was so quiet. He had marched with Dr. King. He was so incredible. And he just said, let me remind you, Phoebe, that the program and the sort of the foundation of this country is called practicing democracy. We are practicing every single day. Inherently imperfect. And certainly he had seen, Jim Crow, he knew great tragedies in his life because of discrimination. So, that reminder that this is really an act of practicing, but that we need to, move the needle on it. But that moving the needle doesn't mean that we all fundamentally believe the same thing. So I struggle, as I'm sure councils do, with that balance. And it doesn't mean that I think all opinions are always equal. If things aren't factually based, then no, I don't think they have a place. So I'm not sure if that's skirting the question or answering it in some way, but.
Practicing democracy is certainly, I think, what we do. And I'm actually going to drop into the chat because I think our mutual acquaintance, Danielle Allen, recently a report from the American Academy of Arts and Sciences about how to basically restart this democracy. And so much of that was around how do you really rebuild civic practice and make the space for it. And so, I feel like as public humanities people, there was so much in that report that made me think, oh, that's either what we do or we could do that.
Right. Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Brian. One thing, Danielle refers, and I don't know if she's quoting Jill Lepore, the historian here, but she talks about balancing the gory with the glory and sort of having a respect for the founders of the country. I'm quoting Danielle now here. And then also recognizing the terrible things done in the name of democracy. Really, unacceptable things, right? So I'm thinking of slavery, for example. So I think, and I'm not saying slavery was done in the name of democracy, but it is commingled with our founding. Let me put it that way. And so, I would say that I was really pleased to see that Danielle and you and other council directors see a place for the humanities councils in that initiative from the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. This idea that we might be able to jumpstart conversations or create those conversations, the councils in the lead up to the 250th, to focus on telling our nation's story. And that councils really can convene in communities and build those conversations in community and with community to tell those stories, which I think are multiple.
Agreed. I think this is related when we talk about civic space. A lot of your work is working to advocate for our funding through the National Endowment for the Humanities on Capitol Hill in Washington. When you, and I've always admired I was at the conference last year where you presented on how you had worked with Maryland legislators and how you had really shown, I think, the multiple impacts that funding has throughout a state. As you look to working with congressional representatives, how are you thinking of making that case, especially in the level of dysfunction that we have, which I think at the same time there's been this paradox of the support for National Endowment for the Humanities actually creeping up. And strike that balance, I guess, when you talk to any legislature, but especially a legislator that may be skeptical of the work that we do.
Right. Well, I can say again, everything I learned from Christina Velitis. So, but it turns out some cliches are true. And even at the national level, all politics is local. So the way I approach this is that every legislator wants to know, what have you done for their district, or if they're senator, their state, done for their constituents lately. So I think it's very important to, I think, particularly with folks who might be skeptical, the larger sort of ways that I talk about democracy demands wisdom and vision in its citizens, loftier ways to talk about things. I maybe go more quickly to the specifics of what have we done locally for your historical society, for your schools, for your literacy programs or veterans communities. So I think also trying to form a human connection, you know, asking people where they're from, trying to now, you know, here common ground would be good. You know, that you care and know about their communities. And I think, yeah, I just think that's it's just very, very important, and getting to know their priorities, right? If you want to look at voting records or, you know, there's plenty you can find about people. And also remembering that the young staffer that you meet with may be the only conduit that you have to the member, and that person does know their stuff cold. And being that trusted resource for information, if you say you're going to get them something, or ask them, do you want a grants workshop in your district? We can help you with that. I can send you something for your e-newsletter or your text or a photo of your member. You know, be that trusted resource, just knowing that it can go both ways. So, you know, and if you overstate something or misstate something, they're going to know it in a hot minute, and then, you know, then it's not so great. I think also, you know, really relating to them as people and acknowledging, like, wow, your job is hard and you have a lot of things to keep straight and you have hard decisions to make. So I don't think that's, you know, overstating where they are, trying to get some sense of where they're coming from, the 15 minutes that you have with them, where it fits in with their day. So if you can, and now finally, I'll just say also that I would describe to any legislator this public-private partnership that's unique to the councils, because there is a private part to it very often. And we're not just here with our handout. Here's how we leverage our dollars. Here's where we're investing them. And here's the private investment or the state investment in what we do, if that's applicable. So trying to explain that it's a federal, state, and local, all those pieces fit together, has been attractive to some of our less enthusiastic folks, or just people who know a little less about us.
One of the things we're trying to do right now is speak, I think, in state to our elected officials about the CARES Act funding, because it's something that I think is a great story to tell. Mm-hmm. Not done yet, but from what you've seen, I think, what's the story or the lessons you find from that experience? Because I do think it felt like once in a lifetime going through it, and certainly we know there's there in the cultural sector for more funding. But as you watched councils approach that challenge, what were some of the takeaways for you?
Well, one of the takeaways is, I think, a little bit unexpected for me. I mean, I am, you know, so proud of all the work that the councils do, and really in awe, maybe partially because I know somewhat what it takes, but also just, you know, when I see them have an impact like that as a group, I think that's one of our greatest strengths. And I was really happy to see just the pride that the councils have in really serving the country at this time. And yes, it is falls far below what is needed, but that purpose, which you have every day, but turning it on a dime to get this money out to those organizations that need it. So that's very, very important to me, and shows a real strength and pride, and really level of dedication. I mean, it's just astounding. And I think the story too is the local grassroots connections, those organizations that I think we can safely say would not be funded except through the council's CARES grants programs. So the uniqueness of the council ability to carry something like this, carry it off, carry it out, and with the utmost integrity.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think it was actually therapeutic and sustaining for a lot of us to be able to do that good work in a time when everything was in such turmoil, and it continues to be. But that integrity and the ability to deliver in that situation is something I think we'll all continue to take pride in.
Seeing it in your colleagues too. It's like, right? It is really appreciating each other so very much.
I have to say I felt a little bit of competition too about who was going to get, the application open first. And as I did it, I thought, I'm probably overthinking this, but it felt like a competition in a good way. You started a new job in the middle of all this. And new jobs are never easy right off the bat, but you had, I think, a lot of experience about this particular type of work. Are there things that you came in knowing you wanted to do and still know, despite all this uncertainty, that these are going to be priorities for you, and that for the people who love Mass Humanities or other councils,
right,
be on the lookout, I think, for the Federation to be doing, in the next few years?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing that I would say is, I got hired in February, so it looked really different. We announced in May, I think, or I'm not quite sure even now, maybe April. And then all of this. So, and then March came. And but I knew that the first thing that I wanted to do in order to hit the ground running was to learn, to really, really learn. So to have conversations with all staff, all board members, all executive directors, internal stakeholders, external stakeholders. So that never changed. Everything just went to Zoom. I've never worked in the Federation office one day. So Virginia has been pretty much on quarantine. So we've been working remotely. And so I had met some of my colleagues, but we have started our work together entirely remotely, and they've been absolutely amazing. But I will say that, so those 75 conversations have taken place. I'm really happy. That was my goal for the first 3 months. And then I would say I was also, very much in having conversations with the board committee that hired me, but also with Esther, my fantastic predecessor. I really put at the forefront, really thinking about the Federation's, continuing to strengthen the Federation as a nonprofit organization itself, and think about the capacity, building the capacity of the Federation to even better serve and strengthen the State Humanities Council. So I wanted to look, and I still do, want to look a little bit more internally. So, and that is with nothing but complete praise and admiration for work that Esther and my colleagues did before I got there. But thinking about the ways we can improve communications tools, data collection, redesigning the website, securing additional partnerships like our common purpose with Danielle Allen, and thinking about new programming and funding opportunities in that way, keeping that going, those initiatives. And then I knew from the start, because we had talked about it in my interview, that I wanted to focus on racial equity work specifically at the Federation. So, and, we know that the Federation Board has been supportive of this for, well over a year, but in the transition, they wanted to put pause only so that when a new person came in, we could move forward. And I want to let folks know that we are moving forward. At my first board meeting, the board has approved setting up a working group for race equity work. And when I say race equity, I mean centering racial equity and anti-racism at the center of Federation work itself. So looking at all aspects of the organization. Councils may be far down the line on this work already. We recognize that, but the Federation's going to turn internally to look at that while the councils continue to do their amazing work. We're looking at some workshops from the Racial Equity Institute in Greensboro, North Carolina, and hiring a consultant so that we can get our goals for this work. I mean, this is, you know, this work is never ending. It's lifelong learning, just like we're lifelong learning. So, but we need some kind of guardrails, I think, there on where we're going to focus. And also the Federation is going to launch a webinar series looking at different aspects of racial equity councils, featuring councils that are doing racial equity programming, addressing inequities, and then also those that have established DEI committees or work internally, and then some grant making. So we'd also like to feature the work that the councils are already doing. So I knew that would be a priority, and you know, we're moving forward despite everything is on Zoom. So.
That sounds fantastic, and I think that the work of the Federation is so important and needs to be known, and that centering, I think, has so much potential because of the impact the Federation has on all of the councils and their direction. We are going to open it up for questions in a few more minutes, so please do be dropping that into chat, but I think I'm sort of circling back to our first question and ask something that I've been asking other folks. Given taking on a new job, given a global pandemic, a change in location, learning a new staff all remotely, is there a book or a place or a piece of music that you've been turning to throughout this time again and again, just to sustain you, I think, as a leader and keeping your feet on the ground? Yeah,
I appreciate that. I will say, you know, I'm reading a number of books. I'm reading The Warmth of Other Suns. That keeps things in perspective for me. But I will tell you what's sustaining me right now, actually, sort of ironically, are a couple of things I do on Zoom. One is every Sunday at 3 o'clock, I have a very large family, and there's 25 sort of extended folks. Not everybody gathers every Sunday, but we meet in 4 different time zones, and we just get on the phone for an hour to chat and catch up, whoever can kind of do it at that hour. And, you know, through that, I've gotten to see the first steps of my great niece and nephew. One's in London, one's in Utah. And then my FaceTimes, I actually have 2 grandchildren through mixed marriage, you know, a late in life marriage. And so I also get to hang out on FaceTime with my grandchildren. So, you know, that's what sustains me. I will say also my grandson moved to Baltimore when I was living there before I moved to DC, and when I did start the job, from Brooklyn for 3 months. So I got to see him every Sunday for donuts. We got to see him every Sunday for donuts. So, and then for fun, and I hope people remember fun, my husband and I listened to WWOZ out of New Orleans, the Guardians of the Groove. So you may be familiar with that, Brian. I don't know. So that's what we listen to for fun. So that's also sustaining.
Oh, that's great. I had never, the first year we were here, I didn't listen to WWOZ because the nostalgia was too powerful for me. And I had done a lot of work and volunteering. I had friends on that station. And then May, they rebroadcast old Jazz Fest recordings, Jazz Fest in person. And I had gone to the first one after Hurricane Katrina, which was a very powerful experience and really sealed the deal of moving back there. And, you know, Bruce Springsteen played that never played before, and he did a set of Pete Seeger songs. It's become lore, you know, for the Jazz Fest diehards. And it was so crowded that my wife and I, my future wife, and I didn't stay. We ended up going and seeing what was really the homecoming for Trombone Shorty. The experience musically was so honestly, I would say life-changing, actually. That the Springsteen experience to me was always, you know, whatever happened over there, it couldn't have this authentic New Orleans experience. So in my backyard in Florence, Massachusetts with the kids in May, and they're playing the Bruce Springsteen. He was not like my main guy, but I have sympathies for him. And as the song started to unfold and I started to realize remembering what the setting was.
Yeah.
It was very, very powerful. And you're right, radio, that particular station, but radio in general, it's a place that I go to a lot, I think, over the last couple of months.
Yeah, well, I'm also going to open up, and if I wasn't going to say Phantom Toll Booth, I was going to say actually Born to Run, which I got in 6th grade, and that was, that's this guilty pleasure thing of Springsteen. So to me, that's poetry. I know we can, talk about, Bob Dylan and the Nobel and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, that's another founding kind of place for language and, communication. So
I think you touch on something there, though, because we, so many of us actually begin our lives with literature through music and thinking about and how evocative that is. And then I don't know if you did this, but I know as a kid, I wanted to know about the musicians. I wanted to, and this, I couldn't go to their Facebook page or their website. I had to figure out
liner notes,
just that kind of stuff, or somebody older that would date to tell me something about.
And then adding, just a whole bunch of teenage hormones. I think it also just sticks in my mind that those lyrics. So
it all seemed much bigger then. I actually thinking about you growing up. This is a question that I hadn't thought about, but you growing up around DC, and you were in Maryland, so you weren't far away. But coming back to the city now, it certainly struck me as a city that's changed a bit since I used to when I was born to run. But I wonder if anything, for you, initial thoughts on being back there again, both personally, I think, but also what the city looks like.
Yeah, well, my other experience is that I lived here from 1989 to 1991 after college when I worked at the National Archives, and that was a very tough time to live in DC. Mayor Barry, who was brilliant in many ways, I'm going to actually defend Mayor Barry, but who was an addict, and he was actually actively smoking crack as a mayor during that time period, and it didn't work out well. And, he had a disease. And, but yeah, so coming back now, there's also a lot of displacement of folks. So it's very different, but it feels, feels a lot better. It feels different, but also I like to be a tourist here. I do like to go to monuments, and really it's growing up here. I don't think I fully appreciated the awe of it, particularly the art museums and the other experiences. I sat in the botanical garden the other day, and it's just amazing. It's steps from the Capitol. It's just so much beauty. So I hope once it's safer to do so, I can do more volunteering and getting connected to my neighborhood and my community. I do go to the farmers market and donate food there, and but there's more to be done, and I'd like to be more immersed in my communities.
Are the museums, the Smithsonian museums and the other federal buildings, are they open now?
I don't believe so. I know the National Gallery did open for, you have to leave within, someone on here will know better, but like an hour, and it's all social distance. But someone who I had dinner with said it wasn't very social distanced or very controlled. So haven't been there yet, but I don't think the other Smithsonian museums are open, but I could be wrong. I've been a little busy. So.
That's true. I keep thinking I'm going to get more. I went, actually, there was a press conference for our CARES Act grantees in in the Berkshires. And so I went to the Norman Rockwell Museum.
I read about that, yeah.
And that was opening day there. And the feeling being back in a museum was both, wonderful and uncanny because of how empty it was. The interesting thing was that was actually my first visit to what's that really amazing institution, an amazing setting. But they already had a big exhibition up about Rockwell's work on civil rights, and specifically some freedom riders. And so really, really a great experience given all of the context and why I was there. And also, Rockwell is someone that people could overlook in some ways, but actually there's this central choice he makes to do that work at the height of it, to some detriment to his career at that point, that I I guess I would say I took a lot of inspiration, and it felt like, yes, I'm back in a museum, something that I'm going to take with me for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Well, I hope we get to do more of that in person together.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
A great opportunity. I think, again, it's important for me for people to get to hear your perspective and to know that the Federation is there and that there are 55 councils out there doing this work, because it's having an impact in a very in a trying time.
Yeah. So, and I see, I don't think we have any questions, but I really do welcome questions if anyone has them. I'd be happy to talk about anything. But yeah, I too look forward to, I mean, that's really what I miss, is the reason, part of the reason I'm so honored to have this job is that, you know, I have my colleagues who I've known many and get to meet new colleagues. And so that's tough, not to be able to kind of wrap my arms around that community and have us be together. And trying to think about exciting ways for us to be together virtually at the national conference and some other sort of iterations. So please, council community, stay tuned for the National Humanities Conference 2.0. So we're more soon on that, and how hopefully we can be together.
That's an exciting teaser.
Some way it is. Yep.
Well, our last one was in Hawaii, and I feel like all of us are keeping Hawaii in our mind as we go through all of trials and tribulations. But,
exactly.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear. Thank you, Phoebe. Again,
of course, entirely my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. As I said, our next event is August 19th with Stuart Rockoff. You can visit masshumanities.org to learn more about these events, and you can also follow us on Facebook. Do also follow the Federation. They're putting out more and more important things out there about all the work that is going on nationally in the humanities. And as Phoebe said, I think there's more good news and more good social media and platforms out there to come. So everyone have a great afternoon. Please continue to support the humanities wherever you are. And thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Phoebe.